Hey, this is Lee Waller, and welcome to Motion Media Design with After Effects. I'm going to take a look at recreating this dial here. You could use it in a futuristic heads-up display. So to start, let's start a new composition. New composition, and then 1920, 1080, 24 frames. 10 seconds will work for this. Hit OK. Most of this is built using shape layers. So we're going to start off with the Ellipse Tool. I'm going to click right up there, make sure that you have the Ellipse Tool, and I'm going to double click. That starts us off with an ellipse, and we're going to make some adjustments to this. First thing we want to do is go to the Fill option right up here at the top. Click on Fill, and we want a radial gradient for that fill. We're going to hit OK on that. We'll adjust this in just a minute, but then we want to get rid of that stroke. So let's click on the stroke property there and go to None. Hit OK. And now let's adjust the size of this. We'll come down here into the timeline, go to Ellipse Path 1, go to the size right there, deconstrain those proportions, and the size that we want for this is 568 by 568. And now we can adjust this gradient. If your gradient is not white to black, we can jump down in here again into the timeline and go to our gradient fill under that first shape layer that we have there, and we can edit that gradient. And there you'll have your first color stop will be white, and then your second color stop there will be black. Hit OK on that, and then we can come here to our handle and drag that out just a little bit. And there is the background for this dial that we're creating. I'm going to close that up, and then the next thing that we want to do is we want to create a stroke on the outside of this. To do that, I'm just going to duplicate this first ellipse, Control D, and then we'll go into this Ellipse 2 and make some adjustments. So we don't want that gradient fill, so with that Ellipse 2 selected right there, we can jump up here real quick, go to Fill, and turn off that, select None, hit OK. And then also on Stroke, we can do a solid color on that stroke, hit OK. And adjust the color there. We do want white for this design, and then the size of that width will be 6 pixels right there. So you can adjust that, click on that, type in 6, then we'll have that outer stroke on this design. I do want to dial back the opacity of this fill, so I'm going to jump back into Ellipse 1 right here and go to Gradient Fill, open that up, and then come down here to the opacity property for it. And we want to set that at 30%. Okay, so we've completed the background. Let's take a look at the next part that we want to design. Let's work on this center triangle piece here that has the 4 points in it. To do that, we're going to start with a different type of shape tool. Let's make sure nothing is selected down here in the timeline. Let's go up here to the Ellipse tool, click and hold on that, and let's go to the Star tool. Select that, and now with the Star tool selected, let's double click on it. We're going to make a few changes to this. So on this star, we do not need a fill, so let's click on the word fill and select None, hit OK on that. We do need a stroke, so on the stroke property there, click on it and let's do a solid color, hit OK, and set that width at 3 pixels. And now we can come down into the Polystar properties down here in the timeline and begin to make a few adjustments here. So we open up Polystar 1 and Polystar Path 1 right there. Let's go to Points. We'll need 3 points on this. And then we're going to rotate this 60 degrees. And we're going to adjust the inner radius. That will become 6. And then the outer radius will become 223. So we've completed that first part. Then what we're going to do is we're going to add in our 4 circles here, one center and then one on each point of the star. To do that, make sure that the shape layer is selected, and then come up here again to the Star tool, click and hold on it, and let's select the Ellipse tool. Let's double click on the Ellipse tool. Of course, we're going to need to make some adjustments. So let's go to Fill. Let's select a solid color on the fill. We can go with white. We do not need a stroke, so we'll select None on that. And of course, we're going to need to bring this down in size. So let's come down here into the timeline, open up the properties for the ellipse path 1, and deconstrain those proportions right there. And let's set this size at 20 by 20. And there is our first point right there in the middle, and that's where we want it. So what we can do from here is, let's just close up the ellipse 1 properties right there, select it, and we're just going to duplicate it and move it. So let's Command D or Control D, and we have a second one there, and we can hold down the Shift key and use the arrow keys to begin to position this. And might need to let off the Shift key just a little bit. So there's our second point. We can duplicate it, and again, using the Shift keys and the arrow keys, we can move that over, get that into place. And then for this bottom one, let's just duplicate ellipse 1 again, Control D, and then we can shift and move that down into place. What I want to do is, I'm going to show you this from the original design. See how it's a little bit brighter here in the center and it fades off? All of these designs here do that. And the way I'm doing that is using this background layer as a track matte or a luma matte, so that we get some opacity created here from this point back to this point. I'll show you how I did that. So we're going to come back into the composition we're working on. I'm just going to close that up. To do that, I'm going to duplicate the background, Control D, Command D, and I'm going to drag the background up above Shape Layer 1 right there. And I'm going to go in here, and I know I need to make a couple of adjustments to this. I know I don't need the ellipse 2, so I'm going to hide that by clicking that icon right there. And I'm going to go into ellipse 1, and I'm going to go into the gradient path and bring that opacity up to 100%. What we're going to do is we're going to use the luminance values, the bright and the dark values on this, to blend this layer into the background. To do that, now that we have this background set up, we're going to go to Shape Layer 1, and we're going to go to Track Matte right here. If that is not showing up, you may need to click Toggle Switches and Modes right here. There's the switches, here's the modes, but we're going to go to Track Matte, click on None, and go to Luma Matte. And so what it does is it uses this layer right here, uses the luminance values of the background to blend it in. All right, let's move on to the next part of the design, and that will be the dashed lines here. To create that, we're going to need another polystar or star tool. So let's go up here to the ellipse tool, select it, and go down to star tool. Then we can double click in there, and we're going to need to adjust the fill. Let's turn that to none, and we will need a stroke. Go to solid color on that, hit OK. We'll leave the width at 3 pixels. And now let's jump into the polystar properties down here in the timeline. Let's go to the polystar path. We're going to need 3 points on this, and we're going to rotate this 60 degrees. We're going to set our inner radius to 30 and the outer radius to 263. We're going to make one more adjustment to the outer roundness, and we're going to set that to a -73. So we have the basic design. To create the dashes, we're going to need to go into the stroke properties here and come down to dashes. I'm going to click the plus button there to set that dash. And we're going to leave that at 10. And then we're going to animate this using the offset. So with the timeline indicator at the beginning of the timeline, let's click the offset button right there to set the first keyframe, and then we'll go to the end of it and we will increase that to 300. And what that does is it animates that line. So let's back out of that and let's label this now as dashed lines. We're going to hit enter. And we want to blend this in also with the background. To do that, we already have this background to set up, so we'll duplicate it, Control D. We will drag a version of it above our dashed lines, and just like we did a moment ago, we're going to go to the Track Matte and select Luma Matte. And again, you can see how that is now blending in to our background. So take a look at the original composition, and you can see that tracer line now there is what we want to create next. So go back into our composition, and what we're going to do is we're going to duplicate, and we'll speed things up. We can duplicate both of these. We want to duplicate the dashed lines because we'll use it to create the tracer line, and then we'll also want to blend it in with the background. To do that, we will select both of these and hit Control D. And so there we have dashed lines 2, which what we'll do is we'll label it tracer. We'll go into this one and make a few adjustments to it. We're going to add a modifier to this. So select Polystar 1, go to Add, and go to Trim Paths. We're going to use this Trim Paths to animate that moving around. We do need to go to Stroke and remove the dashes. So let's select the minus button right there. That removes the dashes. And on Trim Paths right there, we'll leave the start at 0%, and then our end, we'll set it at 2%. And that creates a very small line. It's right here. It's hard to see, but it is right there. And what we'll do is we'll animate it using the offset. And with our timeline indicator at the very beginning of the timeline, let's set a keyframe for that. Set it at 0x at 0.0 degrees. And then we'll bring that to the very end of the composition, and we'll set that 0x at 5. And so we are telling it to do 5 full rotations. And so now we should see it moving through there. All right, so we have that tracer line set up. Now let's finish up the rest of the design. We have these 3 lines here, and then the text. So to create those 3 lines, we're going to need the Ellipse tool. Make sure that nothing is selected down here in the timeline. Go up here, get your Ellipse tool, and let's double click. There's our ellipse, and we do want it to be just a stroke, so no fill with a stroke. And of course, we're going to need to come down here into the ellipse and make some adjustments to the size, deconstrain those proportions. And the size that we want for this will be 463 by 463. So we're going to add a modifier to this. Make sure that ellipse 1 is selected. Let's go to the Add button and select Trim Paths. There is our Trim Paths. We're going to make a few adjustments to this on our start and end and offset. So for the first path, we want to set this at a start of 37, an end of 63, and then we want to rotate this 180 degrees. So there is our top line right there. So we can close up that ellipse 1, and it's going to be very simple to make the next 2 by duplicating this. So select ellipse 1, Control D, Command D. Let's open up ellipse 2, and we'll go to Trim Paths again. Everything's set for it. All we need to do is adjust the offset. So rather than 180 degrees, let's set this one at 300 degrees. So there's our second line, and to finish off the third line, let's duplicate that ellipse 2, jump in there to the Trim Paths, and offset at 60 degrees. So there are our 3 lines. Now, just like we've been doing with everything else, we want to blend this in. So I'm going to duplicate background 4 there, bring that up above our shape layer there. Let's label that shape layer there as circular lines. And on that, we'll need to go to Track Matte, select it, and Luma Matte. And so now that is blending in. So we're pretty close. The last thing that we want to do is add in our text. So I'm going to start off with the text tool, jump in here, type in Engine in all caps, Sync. And I'm going to go back up here, get my selection tool, and let's go to position. It'll be a little bit easier on us if we go ahead and do this. And let's dial that into 960 by 540. That's the center of our composition. That'll help us on setting this up. And what we need to do now is we're going to use a mask to curve this into this position right here. This gets a little tricky, but what we need to do is make sure that our engine sync text layer is selected. I'm going to go up here and get the ellipse tool, and this time instead of drawing a shape layer, it's going to draw a mask on that text layer. Now I want to show you this area right here. That is our X and Y coordinates of our cursor. And what I want to do is I want to get that at 960 by 540. That'll be dead center of the composition. So this is a little tricky. I'm going to jump over here, start moving in, and just kind of move around until I get it to 960 by 540. I've got it, whoops, had it there. Once I get it, I'm going to click and hold. And then I'm going to hold down my Shift and Control key. And what that does is it constrains and holds me from the middle out. So you can see, again, I'm holding down. I've clicked in the center, and I've held down Shift and Control or Command. And I'm going to drag this out just beyond those 3 lines there, and I'm going to let go. So that is how I can draw this mask from the center and create a perfect circle there with this mask. Now that is on my text layer, and so now I'm going to go into my text properties, and you can see that mask is there, and I'm going to open up the text property, and you'll see the path options there. I'm going to open that up, and I'm going to look for this mask 1, and what it does is it sets that text now on that path. There's a few things I can do to adjust this. I want to reverse the path. That drops it down here to the bottom. And then I'm going to use my first margin property there to move this up to the top and kind of get that centered. And it is off a little bit. But what I can do to fix that is I can come over here to my character palette, come to my baseline shift property right here, and drag this down. And yours might be different than mine because of the way I had it set up. But I'm going to adjust that till I kind of get that lined up in that space that I want it. And then just going to grab my selection tool, click off of everything so I can take a look at it. So there's our completed dial. Thanks for watching. For a more in-depth look at motion media design with After Effects, check out the rest of my tutorials.